What happens to your mind after 70? Scientists recently discovered that some people's brains at age 75 function at the same level as a healthy 25-year-old. No drugs, no surgery, no supplements. These people weren't genetic anomalies. They were studied. And what the researchers found destroys everything you think you know about aging and your mind. Scientists recently found that some 75-year-old brains are indistinguishable from a healthy 25-year-old's. Silence. Then, at Northwestern University, researchers have spent years studying a group they call superagers, adults over 80 whose memory and cognitive performance match or exceed people in their 50s. When they put these brains in an MRI machine, they didn't find preservation. They found something stranger. Certain regions were larger than those of much younger adults. The cortex, the outermost layer responsible for memory and attention, was measurably thicker. This isn't a feel-good story. It's neuroscience, and it starts by destroying the single most dangerous assumption about aging. That after 70 the brain is on a one-way road to deterioration. It isn't, but the brain does change after 70. Profoundly. Understanding exactly what changes, and what doesn't, may be the most important information you encounter this decade. Yes, the brain after 70 processes information more slowly. The myelin sheaths, the insulation wrapped around neural pathways, thin with age. Signals still travel, just not as fast. Working memory, the ability to hold multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously, softens. Fluid intelligence, solving brand new problems quickly, also declines. But here is what almost nobody talks about. There is a second form of intelligence called crystallized intelligence. The accumulated knowledge, pattern recognition, and interpretive depth built from decades of lived experience. It is measurable. It is real. And it does not peak at 25. Studies show crystallized intelligence continues rising into the 70s. Vocabulary, one of its best single measures, peaks in the late 60s to early 70s. The aging brain also undergoes something called neural pruning. Weak or redundant connections are gradually eliminated. This sounds alarming until you understand what it actually means. The brain becomes less cluttered, less reactive to noise, more focused on what it has learned to identify as genuinely important. The noise-to-signal ratio improves. This is not decline. This is refinement. And there is a buffer against decline that almost no doctor mentions in a checkup. It's called cognitive reserve. Every year you spent reading, learning, staying curious, engaging with challenging ideas. You are building a structural buffer in your brain. People with high cognitive reserve can sustain significantly more neurological damage before it shows up as functional loss. The brain essentially built itself a backup system, and it did it every time you made it work. In 1999, Stanford psychologist Laura Carstensen published research that would take decades to be properly understood. She discovered what she called the positivity effect. As people age, the brain actively shifts toward processing positive information more deeply than negative. Older adults shown a mix of positive, neutral, and negative images remembered the positive ones with significantly greater accuracy. This is not wishful thinking. It is documented neurological behavior. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes measurably less reactive with age. Older adults show substantially reduced amygdala response to threatening and negative stimuli in brain scans. They are not numb. Their emotional range is fully intact. But the hair trigger reactivity that dominates younger brains, the reflexive firing of fear, alarm, outrage, quiets. Think about what this means practically. The capacity to remain regulated under pressure. The ability to read a room without being pulled into it. The skill of distinguishing what truly matters from what is merely loud. These are not soft virtues. They are measurable cognitive competencies, and the neuroscience says they peak in the healthy aging brain. This is why experienced judges, diplomats, and negotiators frequently perform at their highest level in their 70s. The brain is not slowing down emotionally, it is deepening. What actually destroys cognitive function after 70 is almost never what dominates the conversation. It is not age itself. It is a set of specific, largely preventable conditions operating silently for years before they become visible. Loneliness is the first, not sadness. Loneliness, the subjective sense of social disconnection. A meta-analysis of 3.4 million people by researcher Julianne Holt-Lundstad found that chronic social isolation carries a cognitive and mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Neurologically, it elevates cortisol for years, which directly shrinks the hippocampus, the brain's primary memory center. Sleep is the second. During deep, slow-wave sleep, the brain activates the glymphatic system, a network of channels that opens up and physically flushes out metabolic waste, including amyloid beta, the protein that accumulates into plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. This system barely functions while you're awake. It is the brain's nightly maintenance cycle. Research from the University of Rochester showed that even a few nights of poor sleep measurably increases amyloid accumulation. Years of disrupted sleep is not a lifestyle inconvenience. It is a neurological slow emergency. Hearing loss is the third, and the most overlooked. A Johns Hopkins study tracking adults over 12 years found those with mild hearing loss were twice as likely to develop dementia. Those with severe hearing loss were 5 times more likely. The 2020 Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention identified hearing loss as the single largest modifiable risk factor for dementia, more impactful than physical inactivity, more impactful than smoking. It is almost never discussed this way. Medication is the fourth. A class of drugs called anticholinergics, found in common antihistamines, bladder medications, and sleep aids, block acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter most directly involved in memory and learning. A 2019 study in JAMA Internal Medicine found consistent anticholinergic use associated with a 49% increased dementia risk. Millions of older adults take these medications daily, prescribed by doctors who are not always connecting the cognitive consequences. The brain after 70 is not fragile by nature, but it is exquisitely sensitive to isolation, sleep debt, untreated hearing loss, and what gets swallowed each morning without a second thought. For most of the 20th century, neuroscience held that the adult brain was fixed. You were born with neurons, lost them over time, and that was the biological contract. That view is now definitively overturned. In 1998, scientists Fred Gage and Peter Erickson published proof of neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, in the hippocampus of adult humans. The brain can grow new cells, not in childhood only, in adults. The live question today is not whether this happens, but under what conditions it is maximized. The most potent known stimulator of new neural growth is aerobic exercise, specifically through a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which acts as a biological growth hormone for neurons. In 2011, Kirk Erickson at the University of Pittsburgh demonstrated that 1 year of moderate aerobic exercise increased hippocampal volume by 2% in older adults, reversing 1 to 2 years of age-related shrinkage. A single year, moderate exercise,